I was 26 when the world tilted under my feet. The day was sharp with February cold, the kind of New York cold that bites your bones even when you wear two coats. I walked into the law office with a knot in my stomach, unsure why I'd even been summoned. The room they let us into was windowless, dimly lit by a brass lamp on the conference table. Everything smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. My parents were already seated when I arrived. My mother, Margaret, sat straight-backed, her arms folded tight across her chest, her lips pursed as though she were waiting to correct someone. My father, Richard, looked restless. His eyes darted to the clock on the wall, checking the time as if every second spent in this place cost him something. And then there was my sister, Jennifer, golden-haired, perfectly composed, her smile practiced as always. She looked like she had dressed for a magazine cover, not a family reckoning. I slid into the chair beside her, trying not to let my nerves show. A file sat on the table, thick and ominous. The family lawyer, Mr. Dunham, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. His face was unreadable, a mask carved by years of managing other people's grief and greed. "We'll begin with the reading of Richard and Margaret's will," he said, his voice smooth but detached, like an announcer reading the morning news. He unfolded a sheet of paper and began. "To our daughter, Jennifer." And here, he paused, the words hanging in the stale air. "We leave $32 million. Jennifer didn't even blink. She tilted her chin upward, as if this was her rightful crown. My father gave her a thin smile, and my mother actually nodded, satisfied, as though she had rehearsed this moment in her head. Then Mr. Dunham's eyes shifted to me. His tone didn't soften. "To our daughter, Emma, we leave." Another pause. My hands tightened on the arm of my chair. "Our encouragement to go make your own." The words struck like a slap. Not even a token gift, not even a gesture of fairness. Just rejection, dressed in polite cruelty. My heart thudded. I felt the blood rush to my face, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My mother's eyes were on me, cold and deliberate, like she had waited years to deliver this final dismissal. My father didn't look at me at all, and Jennifer, sweet, perfect Jennifer, squeezed my hand with mock sympathy, as though this was just another game we played as children. I pulled my hand away. I thought of our childhood home in Connecticut, the white house with the red door and the sprawling yard where we once chased each other barefoot through the grass. For Jennifer, that house was her kingdom. For me, it was never home. Even then, I had always felt like a visitor, someone tolerated but never fully wanted. That day, with a single sentence, my parents confirmed what I had always known. I was never theirs the way Jennifer was. The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. I wanted to stand and walk out right then, to spare myself the humiliation. But before I could, another man in the room stood up. He was tall and lean, with silver hair combed neatly back and eyes that seemed to burn with calm intensity. He introduced himself with quiet authority. "My name is Thomas Whitmore," he said. "I was your grandfather's attorney." His gaze fell on me, and I felt my spine straighten involuntarily. "He left a sealed will to be read only in your presence. He asked that I open it today." My mother's head whipped around, her face hardening. "That will was revoked," she snapped. Her voice was sharp, laced with panic, the way it got when she was losing control. Thomas shook his head once.
"No, ma'am.
It was never revoked." He pulled out an envelope, its edges yellowed with age, the handwriting on the front unmistakably my grandfather's, bold, deliberate, full of character. My throat tightened. Grandpa had died a year ago, and I had not yet fully faced the ache of losing him. He had been the one person in our family who truly saw me, who sat with me on Sunday afternoons, listening as I rambled about books, dreams, or questions I was too afraid to ask my parents. Thomas unfolded the paper inside and began to read aloud. His voice was steady, reverent. "To my granddaughter, Emma, you were the one who sat with me on quiet Sundays. You were the one who asked about the old books and the broken clocks. You were the one who listened. I leave you my estate in full." The words sank into me like sunlight through dark clouds. For a heartbeat, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then, like a match struck in dry air, my mother erupted. "This is insane," she shouted, her voice shrill. "You can't be serious." But Thomas continued, unfazed. "This includes all liquid assets, holdings, and trusts, valued at approximately $5.5 billion. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Even the tick of the clock on the wall seemed to stop. My father leaned forward, stunned, his jaw working as if to form words he couldn't quite summon. Jennifer's face went pale, the practiced smile wiped clean. My mother's fury crackled in the air, a storm about to break. I sat frozen, my thoughts spinning. $5.5 billion. The number didn't feel real. It was a sum that could build cities, transform lives, move mountains. My heart pounded, not with greed, but with the overwhelming sense that something extraordinary had just been placed in my hands. And then the shouting began. My mother's voice rose first, a screech like glass shattering. "This is a fraud. He was manipulated. She doesn't deserve this." My father tried to intervene, demanding explanations, asking Thomas for clarity, as though billions could simply be misread. Jennifer whispered my name, almost pleading, but her voice sounded more like a warning, as if I had committed a crime by simply existing. I stood slowly, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor. My body shook, but my voice came out calm, clearer than I expected. "Grandpa saw me," I said. That was all. 3 simple words that held the weight of my entire life. He had seen me when no one else did. Then I turned and walked to the door. Behind me, their voices rose in a storm, anger, disbelief, betrayal. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. For the first time, I felt free. Free from their judgment, free from their cold expectations, free to step into a life that was finally mine. As I stepped out into the icy New York street, the wind rushed against my face, biting and real. I drew a deep breath. The city roared around me, horns, footsteps, the hum of life moving forward. And so would I. Grandpa had left me not just wealth, but a chance, a new beginning. My parents had left me with nothing but rejection. And in that contrast, I realized something vital. Rejection can burn you down, but recognition can set you free. That was the day I left them all behind. That was the day my real story began. After the will was read, I didn't return to Connecticut. I couldn't bear to. The house with the red door felt poisoned now, steeped in voices that never wanted me. Instead, I drove north, letting the miles roll out beneath my tires until the city noise gave way to the quiet stretches of Maine's rocky coast. The road grew thinner and lonelier, weaving past bare trees and weathered barns. By the time I reached the cedar house my grandfather had bought decades ago, the world felt both empty and new. The house stood on black stone, facing a gray stretch of ocean that seemed endless. It wasn't grand, not like the estate where I grew up. Its roof sagged slightly, and salt wind had gnawed at the shutters. But it was mine now. When I turned the key and pushed open the door, the smell of cedar and old books met me like an embrace. The rooms were simple, wood walls, wide planks underfoot, a fireplace dark with soot. But something about the place was alive. It hummed with his presence, as though Grandpa had only just stepped outside for a walk. That first night, I didn't unpack. I built a fire, made tea in a chipped mug I found in the cupboard, and sat listening to the waves crash against the rocks below. For the first time in years, I felt peace pressing against me, not judgment. The loneliness was sharp, but it was good, like clean air after a storm. The next morning, sunlight filtered through curtains thin as gauze, waking me. I wandered to the study, a narrow room lined with shelves, and there on the desk I found them, a stack of letters tied with string. The top envelope bore my name in Grandpa's hand, firm, deliberate strokes. My breath caught as I slid a finger under the flap. The letter was short, but heavy with meaning. "If you are reading this," it began, "then you already know what I've left you. Use the money to build, not burn. Build houses, schools, and lives. Keep your name clean. Keep your heart clean. Choose people over parties. Love is the only thing that compounds faster than interest." I read those words 3 times, letting them sink into me. He had known me better than anyone else. He trusted me not to waste the gift, but to grow it into something that mattered. With his voice still echoing in my head, I made myself a list on the back of the envelope. It was simple. Fix this house, start a foundation, find people who care about the work, not the shine. The first step came quickly. The cedar house needed care. Shingles curled at the edges, windows rattled with every gust, and the floor sagged in places. So I found a local builder, James Whitaker, recommended by the grocer in town. He showed up with a tape measure clipped to his belt, weather-tanned skin, and a steady, thoughtful manner. "What do you want this place to be?" he asked after walking the house with me. "Light," I said, without hesitation. "I want it to breathe." He laughed, a warm sound, and nodded. "We can do light." Together we stripped away the heavy drapes and opened the walls where we could. We kept the cedar bones but added wide windows facing the sea. I asked for a long oak table in the main room, sturdy enough to hold both books and conversations. James built shelves for Grandpa's old novels and journals, and we left the fireplace as it was, blackened but strong. I named the house Sea Lantern, because at night, with the lamps glowing and the windows wide, it looked like a beacon against the dark Atlantic. The winter settled in quickly. Snow piled against the rocks, the sky turned silver, and the waves grew fierce. Yet inside, wrapped in thick socks and sweaters, I felt warmth I had never known in Connecticut. That house had been perfect, polished, but cold. This one was imperfect, worn, and deeply alive. Every creak of its floorboards seemed to whisper, "You belong here." Of course, the money still loomed. At night, I would open the bank accounts online, staring at numbers that didn't seem real. $5 billion. Commas lined up like beads, stretching across the screen. It scared me. I could see how easily someone could drown in it, how money that vast could devour a life instead of expand it. So I set rules. If I didn't, I knew I would lose myself. First, I decided on a salary for myself, $120,000 a year. More than comfortable, but not enough to forget what things cost in a grocery aisle. Then I made commitments. I transferred £100 million into a fund in London to support arts programs across Europe, a nod to Grandpa's love of music and literature. I placed $500 million into a green building trust for America, earmarked for small-town libraries, health clinics, and sustainable energy projects. The rest I left invested, untouched, like a reservoir I could draw from carefully, intentionally. When I told James about my plan one evening as we checked the new windows, he nodded. "Anchor before you sail," he said, his voice low and sure. "Exactly," I replied. And I meant it. The townspeople began to notice me, though most didn't know my story. At the cafe, a woman named Ruth asked if I was the one fixing up the old Whitmore place. When I said yes, her eyes softened. "That house always had good bones," she said. "It's nice to see it lived in again." Her words felt like a blessing. Weeks turned into months, and slowly the house became mine in truth. I stacked Grandpa's books on the shelves, ran my fingers over the spines, and thought of the evenings we had spent reading side by side. I kept his clock, though it was forever stuck at 4:17, on the mantel above the fireplace. Every night, I lit the lamps, and the sea outside glowed in the reflection of the windows. Sometimes I wondered what my parents were saying about me back in Connecticut, or how Jennifer was spending her inheritance. But the thought no longer carried the sting it once did. Their world felt far away now, like a closed chapter. Here, in this cedar house on the rocks, I had a different story to tell, one built on choice, not resentment. And so, in the quiet of winter, with snow pressing against the walls and the Atlantic breathing its steady rhythm, I found the beginning of my new life. Not in the numbers on a screen, not in the rejection my parents gave me, but in the wood, the stone, the sea, and the light I chose to let in. New York pulled me back, not with pain, but with purpose. For weeks in Maine, I had built the Sea Lantern into a refuge, a place of grounding. But I knew that wealth, if left idle, becomes a stagnant pool. It needed movement, structure, and direction. So I packed my notebooks, said goodbye to the ocean for a while, and returned to the city where I had once felt small. This time I walked into it with a sense of claim. I found a small office near Bryant Park, tucked between a publishing house and a bakery that smelled of warm bread every morning. The space wasn't much: bare walls, scuffed floors, and windows that looked out at another building's bricks. But to me, it was fertile ground. On the frosted glass door, I had one phrase etched: the Lantern Trust. Simple, clean, and true to the name I had given the house that saved me. I needed a team. Not polished resumes or glamorous names, but people with heart and backbone. The first was Amy Ross. She was 32, sharp-eyed, and had walked away from a lucrative career at a major bank. I wanted to matter more than a quarterly bonus, she told me the day we met at a coffee shop. She had a laugh that was quick and unguarded, and a gift for numbers that came alive when she explained them. I hired her on the spot. Next came Luis Carter. He had spent a decade in nonprofit work, moving between organizations in every borough of New York. He was the kind of man who could walk into a neighborhood center and be greeted by name from 5 directions. "I know where the needs are," he said simply during our interview, and I believed him. He carried warmth like a lantern itself, and I knew our trust needed that light. Finally, there was Nora Bennett. She was quiet, her words measured, her gaze unblinking when she looked at a contract. Where others might see 50 pages of clauses and subclauses, Nora saw intent and risk, like reading a poem where every word matters. "I protect people from fine print," she explained, and I smiled because it was true. With her, I felt we had our shield. Together, the 4 of us set out to choose our first projects. I didn't want symbolic gestures. I wanted tangible work. So we focused on places where need was clear and impact measurable. We committed $12 million to a community clinic in Detroit, a space where families could finally receive care without bankrupting themselves. We sent $6,500,000 to New Orleans to rebuild a school library gutted by years of neglect and storm damage. Across the Atlantic, we placed £8 million into music centers in Manchester and Glasgow, letting young people touch instruments they'd only dreamed of. And in Cleveland, we pledged $25 million to transform an abandoned factory into a clean energy lab, a place where innovation could breathe life back into a city's lungs. Our office stayed plain. No marble floors, no awards hanging like trophies. Instead, we kept a cork board on one wall where we pinned thank you notes, sketches of planned buildings, and photographs of neighborhoods we aimed to touch. Above the board, we pinned a map of America, dotted with colored pins marking every project. Beside it hung a smaller map of Europe. I connected the two with a single thread of blue yarn, stretching across the ocean. "Work travels," I said one evening as we stood around the board. Amy smiled softly. "So does hope," she replied. I didn't chase press, but the news found me anyway. Not the tabloid kind, the curious kind. A reporter named Andrew Hayes reached out politely, asking if I would sit down with him. He didn't want a staged interview in an office. He suggested a diner in Brooklyn instead. Something about that felt honest, so I agreed. When we met, he didn't start with numbers. He didn't even ask about the billions. He asked about Grandpa. "What was he like?" he said, sipping his coffee. I thought for a long moment. "He smelled like pine and ink," I said finally. "He always had a broken clock on the table. He said time tells you what kind of person you are." Andrew nodded, almost as if he'd expected something like that. Then he closed his notebook and slid the recorder back into his bag. "That's your story," he said gently. "Not the number." When the article ran a week later, it was kind. It didn't paint me as a billionaire heiress or a prodigy. It painted me as a granddaughter carrying forward a lantern of her own. It mentioned the clinic, the library, the lab, the music centers. It named my team Amy, Luis, and Nora. It didn't mention my family, and I was grateful for that mercy. Still, my family's shadow reached for me. The calls came, one after another. My mother's voice on voicemail was volcanic, each word dripping with scorn. "You owe us. You owe your sister. How dare you think you can walk away?" My father wrote me a letter, 3 pages long, listing investment opportunities he wanted me to consider. None of them were about people, only profit. And Jennifer, sweet, entitled Jennifer, sent me text messages with pictures of new handbags and the keys to a condo in Miami, as if flaunting her $32 million was a game. Each time, I looked at my phone, then set it face down. Their words had lost the power to break me, but they still carried the old sting. I had chosen a different door, but I could still hear the shouting from the one I'd closed. One evening, James came down from Maine. We had funded an art gallery in Brooklyn, and he wanted to see it. Afterward, we walked by the East River, the city lights trembling in the water. He didn't ask questions about the calls, the pressure, or the weight of carrying billions. He just walked beside me, hands in his coat pockets, silence easy between us. Finally, I broke it. Do good and still be hated, I said. That's the lesson, isn't it? He stopped, looking at me with calm eyes.
No, he said.
The lesson is do good anyway. I carried those words with me all the way back to Bryant Park, all the way up the creaking stairs to our plain little office. On the cork board, the maps and notes waited. And I realized then that the circle we were building, this team, this trust, this work, was stronger than any inheritance fight, any insult, any demand. The circle was mine. The circle was ours. Spring moved like a tide across my life. It arrived first in Maine, the snow melting into rivulets that carried pine needles down to the shore. Then it blossomed in New York, where tulips sprouted in Bryant Park and our office windows filled with more light each day. Finally, it reached London, where I stood in a modest hall with wooden beams and worn red seats, watching a teenage quartet perform a piece they had composed with the help of our grant. The music was not polished, it was raw, searching, sometimes stumbling, but it was alive. When the final note hung in the air, the audience rose, clapping and whistling. Among the young musicians stood a girl named Alice, no older than 15. She hugged her violin as if it were her anchor in a storm. Afterward, she found me in the crowd, cheeks flushed pink with joy. I didn't think music was for people like me, she said, voice trembling with honesty. It is, I told her. It's for you. I slipped 50 pounds into the donation jar by the door, the bill looking small in my hand compared to the numbers I dealt with each day. Yet it felt like the truest gift. Not because of the amount, but because of the way Alice's eyes had lit up with possibility. Sometimes meaning lived in scale, and sometimes it lived in gestures as simple as placing money in a jar. When I returned to America, I knew what I had to do. For months, I had ignored the weight of unfinished business with my family. The calls, the letters, the messages had not stopped. But I also knew I could not move forward with my work while carrying the stone of resentment. So I drove south back to Connecticut, back to the house with the red door that had once been my prison. The house looked the same, impeccable lawn, polished brass knocker, perfect hedges trimmed to sharp edges. It looked staged, as if it were always ready for guests who never came. I parked in the driveway, stepped out of the car, and for a long moment simply stood there, feeling both dread and resolve press against me. Then I knocked. My mother opened the door, her eyes scanning the driveway before she let me in, as if checking for reporters or cameras. She looked thinner than before, her sharpness more pronounced. Behind her stood my father, his smile smooth, the same one he wore when negotiating deals he thought he had already won. And Jennifer, my sister, stood at the top of the stairs in white and gold, beautiful and distant, like a statue that belonged in a museum rather than a home. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had once eaten cereal before school, where I had once scribbled drawings that were thrown away. I set a single envelope on the polished wood. My hands were steady. I am not here to fix the past, I said. My voice didn't shake, though my heart hammered. But I will make a clean end. My mother rolled her eyes, exasperation curling her lips. At last, some sense, she muttered. I slid the envelope forward, but just beyond her reach. This is for Jennifer. $32 million. From me. Her hand shot forward, greedy, but I pulled the envelope back an inch. It comes with a note, I said, unfolding a page from inside. My words were simple, written late at night at the sea lantern. To my sister, we can both build a life. I'll be cheering for yours. Please do the same for mine. Jennifer's eyes widened. For the first time in years, the perfect mask cracked, and I saw the sister I used to know. The girl who ran barefoot in the yard, who whispered secrets to me under blankets, who laughed until we couldn't breathe. The gold and marble of her exterior softened. She whispered my name, barely audible. Emma. It was enough. More than enough. My mother's mouth opened, ready to erupt, but I raised my hand. There's nothing else, I said firmly. No more asks. No more calls. I am leaving now. Please don't follow me. I placed the envelope directly into Jennifer's hands, not my mother's. Then I stood, pushed back the chair, and walked through the red door. The air outside was clear, almost celebratory, as though the world had been washed by rain. I drove north with the windows down, letting the wind whip through my hair. The trees lining the highway seemed brighter, greener, their leaves trembling with new life. For the first time in months, I felt no weight on my chest. My parents' voices faded behind me like a radio station out of range. Ahead of me was the road, wide and unwritten. When I reached the sea lantern, dusk was falling. The porch light flicked on automatically, just as James had wired it, a quiet welcome home. I stepped inside, kicked off my shoes, and sat at the long oak table. The house smelled of cedar and sea air, grounding me. I pulled out a stack of stationery and began to write letters. One to Amy, thanking her for keeping our accounts sharp and honest. One to Luis, for reminding me every day that people come before profit. One to Nora, for protecting our trust with fierce precision. One to Andrew, the reporter who told my story with gentleness. One to Alice, the violinist, urging her to keep playing, no matter the noise of the world. And more, to the clinic in Detroit, the lab in Cleveland, the library in New Orleans, the music centers in Manchester and Glasgow. Last, I wrote one to myself. I left it in the desk drawer, alongside Grandpa's original letter. It read, I did not make my own money. I made my own meaning. That is enough. I placed my pen down, turned off the lamp, and sat for a moment in the soft dark. Outside, the tide pulled back, then rolled in again, steady and sure. The house creaked, settling, alive with memory and promise. The sea sang against the rocks, and the lantern light glowed through the windows into the night. When I finally lay down to sleep, I did so without fear, without the weight of rejection, without the burden of proving my worth to people who never wanted to see it. For the first time in my life, I slept in a life that was mine alone, in America with the light on.